Hi, everyone. I see people starting to log on. I am so sorry for the late start. We had some tech issues over here, but I'm happy to see people signing on. I am going to get started with the introduction just for the sake of time, but I want to say good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Cecilia Mortar. I'm the programs manager for the Steamboat Springs Chamber. And we want to thank you all for joining us in the second session of our Creating a Culture of Retention series. I also want to take a minute to thank our sponsor for the Chamber's Business Education Series, the Employers Council. They are an employers association staffed with nearly 200 professionals focused on human resources, training, and employment law. A few housekeeping items for today's session. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for questions and switch your chat from panelists to everybody so that everyone can see your chat. Joining us today is Nicole Reel, President and CEO of Executives Partnering to Invest in Children. Her experience spans across the private and nonprofit sectors, with her early childhood career starting as a classroom teacher for an on-site employment childcare program. After working in the financial sector for a while, Nicole returned to early childhood and supported the quality ratings and onboarding of over 200 childcare programs participating in the Denver preschool program. Most recently, she held the position of Chief Operating Officer at Denver's Early Childhood Council. There she helped build a 35-person staff and with an operating budget of $5.7 million over the course of 8 years. And with that, thanks for being here, Nicole, and I will let you get started.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cecilia. Appreciate it. I am going to share my screen as I have a slide deck. So thanks again for having me today. It's exciting to talk about this. This is certainly my passion and something that EPIC is dedicated to. So we're going to talk about creating a culture of retention and how to implement family-friendly solutions today. We, of course, are going to also really take a specific lens around early care and education and the access to childcare and dependent care that the workforce often needs in order to enter and remain in the workforce as well. So a little bit about EPIC. EPIC is a 13-year-old nonprofit organization here in Colorado, founded by a group of business leaders and nonprofit and philanthropic leaders who really wanted to create an organization that could serve as the business community's nonpartisan voice in support of early childhood efforts. And so we really focus on really two things: building infrastructure and advancing policies that really have a twofold mission of supporting a great workforce today, attracting and retaining talent today, but also developing a fantastic workforce of tomorrow. This is my daughter back when she was little that you see on the slide. She's now 8 years old. So they grow fast, but I am a mother myself. I'm a Colorado native and have spent quite a bit of time all across our state, including in Steamboat Springs, which I was actually just visiting a couple weeks ago. All right, so the first slide I really wanted to go through, I wanted to ground ourselves in some data points first before we really dive into how employers can help address this in their own practices and their own organizations. So this is the first slide I wanted to cover, which is really just showing workforce participation rates here in Colorado. And you can see that in Routt County specifically, we actually have some of the highest workforce participation rates in our entire state. Essentially, this just means that the adults or parents in the household that are available to enter in the workforce are in fact doing so at a very high rate, between 71 and 79%. So definitely a lot of parents in the workforce, and really we know that in areas of our state where real estate is expensive, where cost of living is high, that it is really an economic imperative for all parents in the household to be working in the workforce. Whether or not maybe one of them would like to stay home may not in fact be relevant. It may be the case that the parent or both of the parents in the household need to, in fact, be in the workforce in order to afford living in Routt County and Steamboat Springs. In addition, I went ahead and pulled some data off of the Chamber's website. So interestingly, I think it's good to take a look at the composition of the businesses in Routt County, specifically because, of course, these policies that really focus on attracting and retaining talent are going to be, in my opinion, that much more important when you have almost 70% of your businesses in Routt County with 1 to 4 employees. So attracting that right person, keeping that right person on your team when you have a small team, just like Epic does, we have a small 3, soon to be 4 person team. It's that much more important to really do what you can to keep those people and attract the right talent to your own organization. I also wanted to share some data. This is national data that was just reviewed by Pew Research, but they also went to thousands of US workers and asked them why they had left their jobs in 2021. Of course, we've all heard about the great resignation that's taking place and the fact that we have so many people resigning from their positions, looking for new jobs. I think, to no surprise, pay and opportunities for an advancement top that list. But coming in at number 4 is childcare issues. And so certainly this is something that has a great impact on a large number of individuals in the workforce, something that we certainly want to think about. You also see things on here like flexibility and making sure that they have some of those components within their job as well. And then this is some data that has come in from the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation. They have been conducting studies with companies and employers across the country, really since the pandemic hit, to get a better understanding of what the impact has been both on employers as well as employees and the talent pool with respect to childcare. And so you can see here, of course, that we have both employers and employees citing really significant departure rates from their own organizations, as well as tentative concerns that families have about returning into the workforce because of access to childcare. Even before the pandemic, we had almost 80% of parents reporting that they had adverse impacts on their efforts or commitments at work due to childcare issues. And when we look at how many families and how many working parents we have in Colorado and really tie those numbers together, it's over 45,000 parents across our state who are essentially making some sort of career sacrifice due to this challenge with respect to childcare. The other thing I wanted to note here was some data that we've seen with respect to women in the workforce. Again, I think a really important thing to keep in mind here. I think most people thought that we had essentially kind of reached our peak in terms of women in the workforce. And certainly across the world, that is true. But in the US, we've actually seen somewhat of a decline when it comes to women in the workforce, really since the year 2000 when it topped out. There are, I'm sure, of course, a number of factors due to this, but certainly the rising cost and lack of availability around childcare and early education is certainly something that I think many tie to that. Coincidentally, the countries where you see the highest trends here, France, Canada, United Kingdom, are all countries that also provide almost fully subsidized or completely fully subsidized early care and education for working parents in the workforce. And so, of course, there's certainly some reason to correlate that access and affordability to childcare with women in the workforce and workforce participation rates. I think it's also worth noting that we also here in the United States are seeing demographic trends that show us that really families are not having children at the rate that they need to in order to replace the population that we are losing. And so, of course, that's important for things like tax basis and things like that. But at the same time, it's also really important for businesses to know, because, of course, our economy and the growth of our economy and the growth of our businesses is also dependent on the ability to grow our workforce and have sufficient talent in our workforce pipeline. And so women being in the workforce is becoming that much more important as well. And just a couple of stats here as well. We know that typically through a number of studies that have been released by McKinsey and Deloitte and other sorts of consulting and data research firms, that mothers versus fathers certainly see different types of perceptions with regards to how committed they are to their jobs once they have children. We also know that oftentimes mothers in the workplace are being passed up for promotions or opportunities, new jobs. Interestingly, there actually is a measurable wage increase or decrease that happens when women or men have children. For women, it's actually a 4% relevant drop in wages in comparison to women who don't have children. And for men, it's actually a 6% increase for wages when they have children. And of course, we also know now that about 40% of US households actually have children in them and also are headed by breadwinner moms, or essentially women who are in the workforce and are the primary wage earner for the household. A couple of things specific to Routt County that we wanted to review with respect to the cost of childcare. The average here in Routt County and Steamboat Springs is about $16,000 a year for the cost of a single child, which is about 20% of the average household income. The Federal Department of Human Services here in the US defines childcare as being affordable when you do not exceed 7% of your household income. So clearly there is an affordability issue here and really across our state and largely across the country, although Colorado really is in the top 5 to 10 states typically, and as far as the most expensive states when it comes to childcare. This is an industry that does operate on razor thin margins, and I've provided a bit of a scenario here to really give you an idea of why that is and what that looks like. Of course, in an infant classroom, you've got only 4 infants to 1 adult, with typically a max of 2 adults and 8 infants in a classroom for 8 to 10 hours a day. And of course, you can see that really if you're charging $20,000 a year for tuition, which is still a lot for a family to afford, you really don't have a lot of revenue to work with when you need to pay multiple staff members, the cost of the facility, administration, food supplies, etc. And assuming that you actually do not have a facility cost associated with childcare, the cost to serve a child aged birth to 2 is approximately $25,000 a year. So very, very expensive in terms of what that looks like, because of course you need to have highly qualified, well-paid professionals working with children, but you also have those low ratios associated with the care of children as well. And again, just a quick look at the gap here with respect to access to childcare. Only 17% of the families with children 0 to 2 have access to the care that they need through licensed childcare facilities. And of course, we also see that District 3, the Congressional District 3 for Colorado, is actually the area of the state with the most significant childcare gap. So again, certainly an area in the state where this is a huge challenge for families, and we have a great amount of work to do. And then really lastly, looking at the economic benefits here, or costs, I should say, we have taken a study that was conducted by the Council for a Strong America, Ready Nation, that really looked at the cost to Colorado's economy as a result of the lack of infant and toddler childcare that families have. This study was conducted actually before the pandemic hit, so we actually believe these numbers are not only outdated, but they are low and unfortunately underestimated, because we have lost care in Colorado because of the pandemic and because of the impacts on the early care and education businesses themselves. But we know that there are, of course, significant lost earnings and lost opportunities for parents, as well as businesses, and of course, as well as taxpayers in the larger economy. When we look at the study that was conducted and we apply the proportionate share of GDP for Routt County to this study, we can estimate that this is actually an economic cost of about $10 million each year to the Routt County economy. We haven't boiled that down for Steamboat Springs specifically, but this at least can give you an idea of what that looks like. And wanted to note here that, of course, no one actually has this cost in a budget as a line item. Doesn't exist as a line item in a budget for a private company or employer, or even for the county or the city of Steamboat Springs. But it is certainly a cost that the larger community and all employers, taxpayers, and parents are facing. All right, so lots of data there and talking about what's going on with respect to families and the workforce. Now we're going to talk about what employers can do to really address some of these pieces as well. So first off, I'm going to start with this nice graphic that, again, was provided by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. We're going to boil some of these strategies down into really three main areas. The first is what we would call quick wins. These are relatively simple changes that you can make with respect to your internal culture, policies, and procedures as an employer and as a small or large business when you're thinking about addressing some of these issues for your pipeline and your talent that you're trying to attract and keep. We also, of course, have internal investments. Those are more robust and also more costly strategies you can employ. But I will say oftentimes have return on investment that they bring in some other ways. So while there is cost associated with it, I want to caution that you shouldn't always look at it as just that cash outlay, but also what you're getting back in return. And then, of course, lastly, community investments. What can you do as a partner, as an employer, as a community partner to really address this issue in the larger Steamboat Springs community as well? All right. So first, culture and quick wins. I'm sure everyone has heard this phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's never been more true than right now and today in this labor market. It is certainly, the time for people to reconsider their career paths, their options, where they want to work, how they want to work, and who they want to work for. So a couple of things that we can talk through here. First, we know from a number of employee studies and surveys that oftentimes employees are not necessarily fully forthcoming with information about their childcare or dependent care or family challenges that they have with their direct supervisors. Of course, there's a direct supervisory relationship and dynamic there. They might believe that they could get passed up for a promotion or a raise if they share some of these concerns or things that they're struggling with. And unfortunately, only 13% of employers and businesses actually do some sort of formal survey work and ask for feedback directly in an anonymous way from employees around some of these challenges. I realize that can be a difficult thing to do when you have a smaller team. Certainly anonymous studies look different when you only have a 3-person team versus a larger one. But I think it's really important for employers to think about how they can intentionally collect data on this. Secondly, check your training and your norms within your own organization. So if you have, for example, a statement that really, says we are family friendly, but you actually don't include any training in your onboarding for potential supervisors or really all employees to think about how you accommodate some of those family friendly needs, then that's not necessarily going to be helpful. Again, thinking about norms for the own organization, normalizing challenges of working families. This is largely going to rest on the shoulders of the business owner and or the CEO or the leadership of the organization. Excuse me. Workers need to see that you are that you value family-friendly environments, but also that having challenges with children or drop off or pickup or, supporting elder care, whatever that might be, are just a part of normal life, and that, employees should not feel badly if they have some of those things going on. And so I think with the pandemic, we've certainly seen more CEOs working from home with children running around in the background behind them. And certainly some of those things have been very, very helpful in normalizing some of these things. If you're in a hospitality or a retail environment, obviously sometimes those things are not going to be possible or relevant or even appropriate. But as much as you can, try to normalize that culture and make sure people feel comfortable sharing when they have some of those challenges. It's going to be very helpful. Also, just make sure you have consistency across your supervisors and your annual review process. Again, a good example, I was recently talking to someone I know who is a single mom and has had, one heck of a time trying to manage virtual learning, in-person learning, school closures, everything under the sun, as well as her job. They had this kind of huddle meeting or get together meeting for employees that happened right around the time of school starting and drop off. And so for that reason, oftentimes she was not able to either make that meeting or could only partially attend because she was getting her son onto virtual learning and trying to do all those things. When it came time for her annual review, even though the company says that they're family friendly and they honor flexibility and accommodations for working families, she was told that she was not going to get a raise because she wasn't able to be as available for her coworkers and attend some of the staff huddles, and had to miss a lot of those throughout the year. So of course there's a disconnect there, right, between what the company and what the organization is saying they value and what they support versus what the direct supervisor's bias and expectation was, and the fact that because she wasn't able to attend those meetings regularly, she had other things she was dealing with her son, and the schooling and all those pieces that impacted how that actually happened. Flexibility, job sharing, and split shifts. I think, again, the hospitality and tourism industries have certainly gotten used to this, and I think have been very creative in how to do these types of things. But again, if you've got people who can either share jobs, because one can work in the morning, the other one can work in the afternoon, or you can split shifts and allow people to come and go and maybe pick up children or deal with some of those things that they need to. It's certainly better to have, two half-time people or try to weave together a schedule instead of not having a position filled at all. So even though I think many organizations and people have for a long time kind of come to think about shifts being kind of very structured and having a certain period of day that they cover, try to think about ways that you might be able to restructure that shift work and think about how, one or more people could actually share that job. And then, of course, also think about any challenges that people might have with regards to actually interviewing and fulfilling the roles that they need to when they're trying to work with you as a potential candidate. So again, childcare might be an issue for them. And they might have a really difficult time actually making it to an interview because of some of those challenges, because they don't have the ability to pay for separate childcare. So always a good question to ask when you are looking for new talent and new individuals to fill those roles. All right. On to internal investments. Again, these are items that are going to take a little bit more time and planning and financial investment. But again, can be very helpful here for employees. Certainly there are options to help with things like finding childcare and or backup childcare or elder care. I will say that a lot of companies have tried to offer and implement these, sometimes with limited success, because these first two strategies are really contingent upon having sufficient supply for childcare in your area. And oftentimes that in and of itself is a huge challenge. So assuming you have sufficient supply, that's something to think about. But of course, that's also going to cause a challenge if you want to implement things like backup childcare or helping employees find childcare. We also, Epic is a small organization. We do fully reimburse the cost of childcare when our employees attend events or go places that are kind of outside of business hours. So we don't offer a reoccurring monthly stipend for childcare yet. We're working towards that, but for now we do offer full reimbursement for childcare for any of those evening or weekend events that our staff might need to attend. Dependent care savings accounts can be great vehicles for people to utilize for actually having the funds that they can use to pay for licensed childcare. There is a payroll tax savings that comes to the employer if that is used as an option. So certainly something to think about and a nice option to have in your benefit suite. And of course, paid family leave, or things like, if it's possible, if your work environment is conducive to this, actually bringing non-mobile infants to work and allowing those new parents to bring those little ones with them, since oftentimes they are maybe breastfeeding or just, of course, have maybe a much greater challenge with finding childcare. And then, of course, the 529 college savings plans are also a great vehicle. A lot of these things have been covered in the toolkit that the Chamber has recently released. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at that, spend some time with it. You can also look at creating community discounts or actually offering childcare stipends to your workforce, depending on what that looks like. So even if it's starting out with a stipend of $100 a month, I would say starting with something small is a great way to go. This is all about taking baby steps when you are implementing family-friendly practices as an organization. And then, of course, if it lends itself well to your own organization and your workforce, you can also think about on-site or near-site childcare. There's a lot of convenience, productivity, and really great workplace design that comes with having this kind of resource and service on-site or near-site for your employees. There is a new childcare-based grant program here in Colorado that has $8.8 million available for employers that are seeking to create these types of facilities. Some of you may have seen some articles about employers in your area, like the ski resort, that are currently pursuing this, and also took part in a childcare design lab that EPIC actually facilitated for employers to really help walk them through the full process of everything they need to do and think about when it comes to creating childcare, from real estate to operations, financial modeling, all those different pieces. There's a lot of myth busting to do here with regards to risk. Certainly there is some risk with operating childcare, just like with many other businesses, but there are insurance policies for that. They're not as astronomically expensive as most people think. Certainly multiple employers can go in on these projects together and can share that risk and that cost. There are really great ways to look at governance to do those things together. And also, of course, we know that there's a long-term return on investment when you do invest in these types of projects together as well. For example, one employer in particular, Patagonia, who has offered on-site childcare at multiple locations for their workforce, anticipates that there's only about 20% of their original investment that they don't actually recuperate in some other way. And they've actually seen, huge changes in their workforce retention and recruitment efforts as well. Just a couple more slides. Employer advocacy and community investments. So something to think about here, really think about how you as an employer, as a business owner, can message supporting these family-friendly benefits, and in particular childcare benefits. Oftentimes this is about framing benefits that are equal versus benefits that are equitable. Oftentimes the individuals that you are desperately trying to recruit into your organization, into your workforce, the individuals that you can't seem to find or promote, the individuals you want to keep are oftentimes those who struggle with some of these childcare issues. And so this is really an equity strategy that oftentimes employers can use to really find and attract and keep and promote those individuals that they really want to have in their workforce. In addition, I think, it's important to think about how that is messaged, because of course, sometimes, employers are trying to think about, okay, like if someone doesn't have a child, how does this equate to, to them, and how can we make sure these are accessible? So certainly we've seen employers create kind of a menu of accessible benefits and stipends. So, maybe they can take $100 a month stipend towards the cost of childcare, or they could take, another stipend towards something else that they would use as a service. Or sometimes employers really do, it's about messaging, and they're saying, this is something just like health insurance that we offer. If you take advantage of it, that's great. And if you don't, that is what it is, but at the same time, they phrase it as this kind of equity approach with regards to making sure they can attract and retain the right workforce across the board, and that existing employees aren't working double shifts and taking on an extraordinary amount of work because there is insufficient workforce in that organization. Employers should advocate through chambers, local partners, and even through organizations like EPIC for early childhood investments and policy solutions. Employers are very, very effective when it comes to advocacy in early childhood. And that is one of the reasons why EPIC was created and we exist. We do a lot of bipartisan policy work at the Capitol, and it's just a different lens, a different approach when we have employers that are not necessarily associated with early childhood that are advocating for these solutions and these policies. Think about how you could put your assets to good use for early care and education in your community, including real estate. So maybe it's not something that you would like to do in terms of, creating or offering on-site childcare, but perhaps you actually have a building, a facility, or land that could be used for a larger community facility or benefit. And of course, think about how you can actually invest in the broader community efforts. Maybe you can work through, and Angie and the Early Childhood Council there in Steamboat Springs or other partners to really make sure that you have the right access to and funding to support the early childhood workforce and really quality efforts that go into that. And the only other thing I wanted to highlight were some policy efforts happening here in Colorado right now. So you can make sure you're kind of fully apprised of everything that's happening at the state capitol with regards to early childhood. There's a lot going on this session. Certainly one of the biggest bills happening right now is House Bill 22-1295, which is the implementation of the new Department of Early Childhood and Universal Preschool. The department will be a cabinet level position under the governor, and universal preschool was of course authorized by Colorado voters through Proposition EE. It will offer 10 hours of free preschool to every family and child in Colorado before the year of kindergarten. And for families that perhaps are further from opportunity in terms of their income levels, or children who perhaps have identified disabilities or need some additional services, it's very likely they would have access to more hours per week for preschool as well. So lots of work happening there. House Bill 1010 is creating a refundable tax credit for early childhood educators, so they can receive up to $1,500 per year as a result of their work within the early care and education industry, and also any progress that they make on the credential system here in Colorado. We have House Bill 1006, which is creating a nonprofit childcare property tax exemption. So for any for-profit landlords, building owners, or developers that would lease space out to a nonprofit childcare entity, that space would then become exempt from property taxes in Colorado. And Senate Bill 130 would create a public-private partnership office in Colorado in the Department of Public Personnel and Administration, I should say, and would actually dedicate about $15 million towards retrofitting and renovating publicly owned state facilities across the state of Colorado for the purpose of child care. We also, of course, have House Bill 1070, which is amending the current statute that allows for early childhood special districts to be created. It is allowing those districts to cross various county, municipality, and other types of political subdivision lines. It's also allowing those districts to accept gifts, grants, and donations. And then lastly, we expect a bill to be introduced probably on Friday this week or early next week that will also have additional funding towards workforce development for early childhood, as well as facilities infrastructure investments. We expect that employer-based childcare facility grant will be refunded with additional money here in Colorado, and that there will also be some additional grants available for new entrepreneurs looking to create early childhood childcare facilities and early education facilities as well. So lots going on at the Capitol. Happy to answer questions now and stop talking and let everyone step in with some thoughts, questions, and discussion.
Thank you so much, Nicole. We do have a question in. Is there a possibility that HB 1006 would include nonprofit childcare to receive tax exemption even if they have their own building?
So there actually is current statute that allows nonprofit childcare facilities to receive a tax exemption if they own their own building. There are certain, I would say, there's a test that they have applied to them, which essentially says that they either have to have 5% of their slot scholarship, or they have to have, I think, 10 or 15% enrollment in CCAP, which is the Carter Child Care Assistance Program. So if that's not currently a tax exemption that an entity is receiving, it's possible that that should be applied, and certainly can be the case.
She responded with thank you. I was wondering if this bill would allow us to not have to do that part.
Yeah, unfortunately, this 1006 is not changing that portion of statute here in Colorado. So that would still be applied. And I think, the primary reason for that is to make sure, of course, that, children and families who perhaps, don't have the means for, full private pay tuition can be served through these programs in exchange for that tax exemption.
Okay. How do we make accommodations like flexibility for some due to childcare challenges and issues, but then not extend to all staff who do not have children? How can we make things equitable?
Well, I would say certainly, it's up to the business owner and the leadership there to figure out, how and to what extent they want to offer flexibility. Certainly we know that the workforce across the board, regardless of whether people have children or not now, are looking for flexibility. So, as much as you can establish those policies to say, it could be drop off or pickup that you have to accommodate, or it could be something else, significant in your life that doesn't have to revolve around children, and to what extent you are able to offer that flexibility as a business owner or as an employer. I think it's really all about transparency and setting expectations. I think what we see oftentimes is employers forget to be very forthcoming and transparent about what those guidelines are, why they're doing it, and what the expectations are around those things. I think if you're very intentional about putting those out to begin with, then people will largely understand, why it is you're doing that. And I think for the most part are pretty amenable to trying to, work with flexibility and work with their coworkers as well.
Wonderful. With salaried employees, when kids are out of school or cannot get care, like for summer with shortage of summer camps, how can employees reduce hours in addition to flexible schedules or remote work to meet the challenges?
Yeah, so I would say it's definitely a tough one, right? We know that schedules get a little bit crazy. We've actually had some employers in Colorado start to think about how they could create some of those accommodations on site for school age children as well during the summer. Certainly that's a conversation that has come up. And at the same time, I think in areas where you have significant seasonality in your workforce, like you do in Steamboat Springs, there also might be ways to look at how, maybe someone who is in a position has seasonality for winter, right, would then, nicely transition over into a position for the summer and maybe job share with someone who wants to set their hours back a little bit because they have children home from school, or they've got, summer camps to arrange, or whatever it might be. So I think it's also being creative around, where do you have perhaps that workforce, whether they're students who are in school 9 months a year, or maybe they're in a winter seasonality type position, and they could be, their skills might transition nicely over to something that in the summertime would also be a good option for them, and, trying to kind of match those pieces up a little bit.
All great ideas. Job sharing has come up quite a bit in my meetings lately, so that's a good one to look into. If you offer flexibility for some due to childcare crisis, then you need others to be more on-site in person and have less flexibility to help make up for the losses due to childcare. What can we do for workers who do not have children to make things fair when we need less flexibility to make up for those who need it for childcare? Also, can full-time salaried reduce schedule with losing salary?
So I think the last question there is a labor question around how you're going to classify individuals between exempt and non-exempt, and how you actually structure that based on, reducing schedules or whatever that might look like. Certainly you could reclassify a position if you feel like that position becomes something where, is something where people job share or need to have more flexibility in terms of the number of hours that they work each week. I think, again, to address the first question, we've had a lot of organizations, thinking about this. To some, it's been a pretty straightforward, listen, we want to accommodate everyone as much as possible. And so if you have, a doctor's appointment that you need to go to, or you need to go take care of your mom and bring your mom to a doctor's appointment, we'll accommodate that. And if you need to pick up your children, we'll try to accommodate that as well. Again, some of those flexible stipend ideas where some employers have just offered childcare stipends and they've said, this is an equity strategy for us and we're just offering it for childcare. Others have said, the stipend is something you can take and you can apply it to childcare, or you can apply it to, an outdoor membership or something like that, right? That, supports worker health. So I think trying to think about what's going to be possible for your particular business, your particular industry, and your workforce. I think the success comes in the nuance and oftentimes comes also from conversations directly with employees. You may find that sometimes employees actually aren't as opposed to additional flexibility and childcare supports for their colleagues as you might think, because they also recognize the benefits of having, I think a more, what I would call maybe harmonious own organization and kind of shift schedule for people, to say, well, maybe someone has to leave early to pick up their child, but then they're also coming in and opening a store, right? Or they're taking maybe a less desirable shift on Saturdays and trying to work that out internally. So I always encourage employers. I think sometimes this is a conversation where business owners or employers want to have this conversation, kind of in private and then have something to present to staff. But I also think there's a lot of value in actually just having that dialogue directly with employees and asking them what they think would be, an amenable solution in ways that, you can make sure, like I said, they don't have to pull double shifts because you don't have enough staff, right? Maybe they'd rather have staff on board who maybe have to leave for 20 minutes to do pickup and drop off and then come back to the office or the store, whatever it might be.
At this point, we have a lot of understaffed organizations too. So something is always better than nothing. Some organizations are starting to focus more on job performance and output versus actual hours worked or hours in the office for salaried employees, especially at the executive level or long-term irreplaceable. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, this depends on the industry and what the actual job and duties look like. Certainly for some, it's on site in a facility or, in a store, whatever it might be. And that is what it is. But at the same time, I think for working parents, as an example, so I'm a working mom. My daughter was virtual learning for a good portion of the pandemic. And, I would take some time off during the day to help her with her Zoom calls or her learning. And then I would work oftentimes in the evenings and be able to review things, catch up on email, things like that. And I will say that I'm actually more effective as a worker sometimes when I'm actually working in the evening. I don't have emails pouring in, and I actually can spend sometimes, going through a document really thoughtfully without being interrupted or having different meetings to bounce back and forth to. So I also would say, again, we've got this kind of traditional paradigm that has existed for employers around, work has to happen between these hours, or people can't be effective after 7 p.m. or, things like that. I think those kind of outdated bias that might exist around, how you structure your day. But it's completely possible that you could have someone working for your own organization and, maybe they can split up their day and actually have 2 or 3 hour spurts of work that they complete in between other things that they're doing. There's actually a lot of research in brain science that shows that, human beings in general work better that way anyways. So it's why Google has like their 20% rule of like, you get 20% of your time to like do whatever, because they know it's going to happen anyways. So, but I think, part of it is just really trying to shift the paradigm to as much as you can. And again, when it lends itself to that, right? Obviously, if you're running a restaurant, there's just going to be certain limitations and things that need to be done at certain times. And, that can make it a bit more difficult, but, as much as you can.
Wonderful. How can executives implement the new culture and family-friendly focus by actually taking the leave or picking up kids themselves? What else can they do to show they do it so others can feel free to do it without a sense of fear?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is really just, is kind of leading by example there and making sure that they know that, I mean, like I have like a Lego set behind me. I don't know if you can see it, but my daughter, has an early release day on Wednesdays. And so I leave and go pick her up, and she's oftentimes like building Legos or, working on things behind me. And sometimes, is here when I'm having a meeting or things like that. I saw like on LinkedIn the other day, there was a CEO who posted, a picture of him and his family, like on a roller coaster, and he was like, take the PTO. That's it. That's the post. And, I mean, I think it's simple things like that too, that people can say, like, it doesn't have to be a week-long vacation. Like maybe you just need, a mental health afternoon and you want to go pick your kid up and take them to the park because you have great weather and, the snow melted or whatever it was. So I think, finding those little things and little ways where, you can create that culture, you can model it, and perhaps you can bring it into your own organization more visibly, as long as that's safe and appropriate, so that people can really see that as a very kind of holistic approach that you're taking.
Yeah, the culture starts with leadership. That definitely has such a big impact. I'll leave it open for anybody to type in some questions in these last few minutes. I'm going to share the Family Forward Guidebook that we created that just has some sample policies along the lines of what Nicole chatted about. So you can kind of read what you could actually put into your handbook and some examples. I would suggest talking to your HR or legal to make sure it fits, but it's in the chat for everybody. Nicole, is there anybody that you would suggest that they contact, or for any tools and resources if a business is thinking about implementing new programs?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, happy to share my PowerPoint too. Yeah, I mean, I think your Family Forward Guidebook is great. So definitely take a look at that. We also have an employer's toolkit on Epic's website. We do provide, support and consulting to employers as well. And so that's just part of what we've done over the years with employers. I think, regardless, this is an area where we hope that every employer will decide to do something here. And again, it can be very small, right? We can all start with small steps. But actually, like I said, sometimes it just starts with having those conversations. And trying to get some direct feedback from employees around what are their challenges and what they see as potential options and solutions there as well.
Do you have any good examples of how businesses have approached their employees to get honest feedback?
Yeah. So again, I mean, I think depending on your culture and how you typically handle some of those things internally, it's hard to, I think it's hard to just talk to people face to face and get information, right? Certainly if you're a larger organization relying on like the grapevine and HR to feed that information up in informal conversations, I think isn't as effective as it could be. So, some sort of anonymous survey, I think, is typically the best way to do that, to just, understand and again, you put it out there and you say, we're asking these questions, to get a feel for what the challenges are. This is not by any means a promise that we're going to be solving all of these things, right? Again, it's all about transparency and communication and setting expectations ahead of time. Just because we're asking about a childcare stipend Doesn't mean we're going to be able to implement it now or right away, or maybe in the future, right? Maybe it's not something people need, but we want to know about it and what you think about these things. So certainly, you know, and it could be like very simple, easy surveys, right? You know, anything that could be even down to like a shoebox that people could put things into. If you need something a little bit more informal and easy for people, or if you feel like you've got the culture internally, you're a small business, small organization, and you feel like people can have a, you know, a kind of upfront and serious conversation and be open with that, then maybe one-on-one conversations or even a group conversation down the road too. So we've seen a lot of companies employ different strategies there. But ultimately, I think, you know, it may surprise you how forthcoming people will be with ideas and suggestions and just saying like, hey, what if we did this every Tuesday? Or what if we allowed people to, you know, do X, Y, and Z? Like some things are probably not possible, and others you might be like, oh, okay, yeah, like that could work.
That's great. One more, can you have the culture of Family Forward as culture and language without all the cumbersome language and policies that might not allow for the flexibility?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's always like what I call the legalese that ends up in handbooks and policies for organizations, because you know there's to some extent some kind of, you know, legal requirements or protections or things like that that you need to make sure are included in there. It doesn't prohibit you from including more informal or fun language in your handbook either, or being more kind of, you know, informal as you present that information to your employees as well. So, you know, it could be a letter that, you know, is at the front of the handbook and really tries to set that tone for who you are as an organization. And even though you've kind of got these more formalized paragraphs of benefit descriptions, you know, ultimately what you're trying to achieve as an employer or as an organization, and really what your goals are around this. And to say like, if you feel like the benefits and the things that we put forward here aren't reflective of what we're trying to achieve, let us know, because sometimes that happens. So
That's great advice. Summer camp costs in Steamboat can be up to $400 per week, even more than your $16,000 estimate per year. In addition, there are huge shortages. Do you have recommendations of what employees can do to meet these gaps in affordability and availability when they have zero options? What can they ask for in this case?
I think this really ties back to, you know, what can be done in the larger community level around access to care and education for children, including for school age children. It's also a huge issue for families. So, you know, I think oftentimes this is where you as an employer or as a business leader can really get involved with, you know, city council, with county commissioners, with other employers to say, you know, maybe we can't offer a $400 a week stipend for summer camp, and maybe we can't create our own on-site summer camp, but we could work with 4 other organizations and, you know, and help solve this issue and make it more affordable, or, you know, help create some better access for families. So I think that there have been conversations in your community that have started to really bubble up around, you know, what does this look like? Could there be a larger effort where employers and, you know, really the larger community could band together and solve some of these issues jointly? Because it's a lot for any one organization to take on. And I know it's really frustrating when you are an employer and you want to help your staff, and you know they're telling you I can't afford it, or I can't find care, and there's nothing that you can really do about it. So I think there's always something you can do. It's just, if you don't have the bandwidth to do it yourself, you know, if you're a small business or a small organization, I think there's power in numbers, and there's power in, you know, in collective impact and work together with other employers and other public leaders as well.
This is a great question. First Impressions too is a great contact. So if you guys want to try to come up with some creative solutions, definitely let me know, and I can put you guys in contact with Angie at First Impressions and see if there's other people maybe interested in partaking. Any last minute questions? We'll give it one more minute and see if anything else pops up here. But Nicole, I want to thank you so much for your time. This has been very enlightening, and it's very important to our community right now. So I appreciate it. And again,
Yeah.
thanks for your patience this morning with the Zoom.
No
Yeah.
problem. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone, thanks for joining, and we will see you next time. Have a great day. Bye.